Thank you, Barbie. That's okay. Go for it. All right, let's see. So, right, all of a sudden there's this word called contamination assessments, but what really is it? It's an incidental disturbance of the survey. All right, that's really what it is. All right, but everybody likes to call it contamination assessment. There are 3 regulations, right? These are 3 regulations that talk about dust and debris. Whoops. Now we're going to hit it. There we go. And you have the 3 guidance documents, right? That give you a guide of how to do dust and debris sampling. So here it talks about debris, dust, right? What is it? It's up to the inspector to decide what it is, right? That's what it basically says up there. The inspector says, this is dust and debris that's asbestos. What does OSHA say? Well, OSHA says you gotta do your due diligence, right? That last part is where it basically all ends, right? You have to do due diligence. Do you know the knowledge? You have actual knowledge of that dust and debris, right? If you do, you gotta find out what it is. Right, so New York State, you have your multi-employer requirement for incidental disturbance, right? So you have to do this. If you find an incidental disturbance, it has to be assessed. What is incidental disturbance? And that's it. You're out of luck for the rest of the state. Basically, the rest of the state doesn't cover what incidental disturbance is. All right? You have to go to the guidance document. And that's question and answer number 292 there. It basically goes into what that is. But again, it doesn't get into what is the debris, what is dust. It says in the regs that it's a suspect material, right? Suspect miscellaneous materials, go by the rules, miscellaneous materials require 2 samples. You're going to have to take 2 samples of this dust and debris, maybe cleaning up the whole dust and debris. So where do you get the definition of what dust is versus what debris is? Well, the ASTM standard basically says debris materials that are amount in size particles greater than 1 millimeter in diameter. Right? Debris. And then dust is less than that size. Right? So make sure you bring that millimeter rule out. That 1 millimeter. So those for debris sampling, it's pretty straightforward, it's easy. You collect the debris somehow, different tools, though I don't think the core bore is really a good tool. I happen to prefer tweezers, right? It's 1 millimeter samples, that's easy, right? Knife. And I went to a presentation and somebody said, business card. And I was like, oh, so this is a good reason to have a business card again, right? And especially mine is that like, it's got an L shape to it, so it even looks like a scoop. So, you also have guidance documents which talk about microvac sampling and with TDM, and wipe sampling with TDM. And my good friend Tom Arbuthal, I love this quote, there are no established methods to take asbestos dust samples with a Post-it note, adhesive tape, lint rollers, or any other crazy methods. Please stop. Okay? Like I said, Tom is, and if Tom did it, he's got a distinctive voice and he's kind of got this look at the end of it and goes, really, come on guys, are you kidding me? So, microvac, right? Basically, filter cassette, personal sampling pump, a nozzle that you cut at a 45-degree angle, and, right? And avoid particles greater than 1 millimeter. And the nozzle should not touch the surface. And the nozzle must be sent in with the cassette for analysis. All right? Wipe samples. All right? Clean room wipes. That's what's in the standard. Right? No ghost wipes, no any other stuff, and like I said, remember, just stop. The ASTM standard for both of these make this point very clear right at the beginning. Significant use. Asbestos containing dust, as measured by these test methods, have no potential, there's not a known potential human exposure to airborne asbestos. All right, so you can't use these things to kind of to suppose that those debris, that dust, is in the air. OSHA even basically talked about dust sampling, and it basically said, no, you cannot use dust sampling for exposure assessments. All right? Key point, results may be useful if the employer determines that asbestos is present. In interpretation of dust sampling, results must be conducted on a case-by-case basis. And limited value when used without reference to historical work and actual breathing zone air samples. Also, remember, you cannot use ASTM's TEM methods because they're not approved by New York State ELAB. One of the things to remember is that basically this statement here has been out since about 2012. All right? So those of you who are still using the ASTM standard, just realize you're not following New York State law. Right? New York State says you're supposed to use an ELAB-approved method to analyze bulk samples. As far as the New York State is concerned, those methods are not approved. It's TEM methods as ASTM wants you to do. So you got to use, if you want to use TEM, there's only one method, 198.4. So what do the results mean? Well, we all know this rule, greater than 1%. All right? So you get those analysis for 198.4, greater than 1% is asbestos. Right? Well, realize OSHA says 1% or less is also asbestos. So in a sense, you do 198.4, if you don't get it undetected, you got to clean. You got asbestos. All right? But if you use the ASTM methods, then you got structures per centimeter squared, right? And the general guide is basically, Millett and Hayes says less than 1,000 structures per centimeter squared is considered low. Well, that's almost 1 million structures per square feet. So how do you justify that? All right? All right, we got 1,000 structures. Yeah, that's 1 million fibers. What's the chance that the 1 million fibers get into the air? The chances one of those asbestos fibers get into the air, which is what we talk about from mesothelioma, right? Well, it takes us one fiber. Yeah. So you have to do your contamination assessment report, right? This is supposed to be going with your variant. How am I doing? Are you ready for me?
You were right.
Are you ready?
You were right, yeah. You were right.
Okay. Right, your requirements. I don't have to read this to you because I think we all know these. If you're writing variances for this type of stuff, this is all, you know all of this, right? What you do for minor projects, right? Minor projects are the only ones you're allowed to sit there and go, okay, sample this, less than 10 square feet. Emergency project, basically follow the emergency project rules, and project monitor performs visuals, and basically we're done, all right? For a small and large project, that's where it gets complicated, right? Now we add a variance, all right? You've got to do this. All right, so if you're over 10 square feet, you've got to get a variance, tell them how you're going to clean it, all that kind of stuff, and wait until engineering services says, amen, you can do it this way. And then you get your contractor, cleaner, and everything like that. And there you go. Thank you.
I'm Mark Bernstein, and I've been doing inspections for way longer than I care to admit. So this is actually a picture in an active tremolite mine in Canaan, Connecticut. So tremolite, one of the 6 minerals. So in doing the inspections over the years, I've had some situations where we've had contamination, disturbance, presumed disturbance of material that may or may not have been there. So I'm going to talk about 2 cases, maybe 3, but 2 that have happened in New York State that I have been involved with. And Yeah, it's gonna leave you with the question of what do we do, how do we do it, and, what gets involved in terms of regulatory agencies, consultants, competing consultants, and, differences of opinion, especially when one might be representing a tenant, and the other one might be representing the owner or landlord. So, tenants of two cities, dusting, and interactions with regulatory agencies. So the first one was in a building that's a nonprofit, and the agency that was in there was also a nonprofit. And they had a phase one, they had some asbestos abated years. Further following up that, they had two phase ones. Both that didn't identify asbestos, and they said the buildings were clean when the client bought the building. So a woman who worked for the nonprofit, she had respiratory problems. She went to the testing, the doctor, and chest x-rays, and said, maybe there's asbestos. So they retained a local consultant out of Westchester. And the consultant performed TEM bulk sampling, went through the place, inspected, collected wipes as per ASTM. Didn't find anything except for one thing. They wanted the area safe for the employees. That's the tenant who was renting from our client. They didn't want any exposures or any potential litigation. My client wants the areas safe and regulatory compliant. They don't want any issues. They don't want to know that someone who's working in the building is getting exposed to asbestos. Regulatory agency, well, it's a hard thing for the regulatory agency because they're not going to come in. They have to take the information that's being given to them, maybe, presumably, but in this case, they were called. And so the consultant, out of 19 wipes, supposedly taken on various places, he found one sample that was reported to be 196,000 structures. So, first of all, you say that's a lot, but anybody who knows the procedure of what sampling and analysis is done knows that the samples are taken, they're sonicated, they're vibrated, and when you take an asbestos clump, that will literally likely never see air, it will never become airborne, but when you sonicate it, all of a sudden it becomes shattered, and you get fibrils from structures to fibrils, very tiny, very small. They report 196,000 structures per centimeter square, which is a lot, it's high. So, right, high. The room was 100 square feet. It was a storage room. It was not a room that was accessed by anybody other than bringing a desk, bringing a chair, bringing something in and leaving. There was no visible asbestos. There had been some samples, suspect material, ceiling tiles, which were not sampled, by the way, some floor tile underneath a carpet, completely enclosed, and there was no gross dust or debris observed. So this is the top of the panel. What led me to question it was, why would only one sample out of 19, and these included registers, vents, on top of desk chairs and things in the office space in itself, they all came back zero. So on top of here, this is where he sampled. Now I'm going to show you a picture of what it was like when I got there and before I sampled it. And this is what really kind of surprised me because, well, I'll let you see. So the picture on the left was presumably sampled. Anybody really think that was sampled? Does it look sampled? No. On the right was after I got done with it. So I completely wiped the entire surface of it. Because again, if there was a problem, I want to protect my client. I want to make sure that they're not liable legally and that the person who's complaining of health-related risk is getting sick from exposure to asbestos. We got nothing. I sent it to a laboratory, they did the ASTM method, we got zeros. So now I'm kind of scratching my head. DOL stated to them, somebody called up to DOL, this was what we were told in a letter, that while DOL does not regulate settled dust per se, the owner was repeatedly told that the asbestos identified had to be removed. Well, what asbestos? Again, there had been inspections, they had abated prior to my client buying the building, but there was the ghost of asbestos. Okay? Next one. So, by the way, the cleaning room was of 100 square feet, was over $25,000 that the consultant who took the sample led a contractor and the client into wanting, believing and convince them that they had to spend a lot of money to clean a room, which is probably basically about the size of the podium right here. I had great difficulty with it because of the fact that there was just nothing there, except for there were floor tiles underneath the carpeting. But again, they were in perfect condition. Case number one, no contamination, no known source. Again, told by DOL, I didn't speak to DOL, so I'm just saying what they were told and what they said to my client, and they pushed for re-cleaning and so forth and spent a lot of money. Fears of asbestos and litigation trump science. Somebody tells you there's asbestos there, and one person comes and says there's asbestos, another person says there's not asbestos. Who do you believe? And how do you know that one's right and one's not the other? I have my suspicion that the result of 196,000, all it took was just putting a little bump down. But again, it did not look at that top of that electrical panel was ever really sampled. Again, my conclusion.
And the ceiling tiles were not asbestos.
Yeah, they were new by new, which brings me to my new case. Now, this was an interesting situation. An office complex occupied by lawyers and staff, legal aid. They were renegotiating their lease. As part of their lease, they said to the landlord, okay, we want ceiling tiles replaced and we want new carpeting. Landlord said, no problem. That's the diagram of all the red was the 5,000 square feet. You can see up there the new ceiling tiles and the old ceiling tiles. Now, at the time, they were all old ceiling tiles, but this was when we got involved. They started over a weekend. They had the building maintenance workers coming in to remove the ceiling tiles. Go in, take them out. Well, they did half of it. And they said, we're going to come back the next weekend. Meanwhile, there was dust and debris everywhere, and some of the workers, the office workers, on Monday said, I wonder if those are asbestos ceiling tiles. Anybody check? Nope. So one of the people there knew my dad and myself and said, you got to call Mark and Marty, they'll be the right people to come in. Well, we came in and we tested the ceiling tile, and of course it was asbestos. We had written a paper years ago called Trouble Overhead, and one of the things that we did notice, and you'll see in the picture, is that when a tile is typically 2x4 and it's got red backing, a lot of times that's an indication or a symbol of a fire rating. Makes sense, we didn't know it at the time, but we saw that and said, could be. Tenant negotiated a new lease, as I said, landlord never tested, used maintenance workers to remove the tiles. Should the job have required a building permit and an asbestos inspection? Well, it's easy to say now that it should have. It didn't require a permit because these were 2x4 lay-in ceiling tiles in a grid. I don't know of any building department that would require a permit, but yes, they could have had them tested. Logically, they should have had them tested. As a landlord, they should have known because the rules have been out there for many years. And I think that working with the building departments, and I know the Department of Labor is making all new changes to emphasize and to mandate inspections. How far does it go and how do you know what's done over a weekend? If they had done this entire job over a weekend, probably nothing would have ever happened other than testing the grade. Yes?
Mark and I went round and round on this issue. These were asbestos ceiling tiles. That's clear, unequivocal. The owner told his workers, his maintenance workers, to take them out. This is wrong. But should this job have required a pre-inspection? The new rules on DOL, maybe we can talk about them, it's one of the last slides afterwards, is that you're supposed to have a permit preceded by an asbestos inspection or associated with it. What do you think? Should something like a ceiling tile removal require a building permit? And should it require an inspection? I reminded Mark that back around 1990-91, if you look at the old code rule, ceiling tiles were considered non-friable. And I was doing a school where the ceiling tiles were amosite. And you could look at the back of the tile, and you could see the fibers popping up. When the contractor would drop them onto the floor, you had enough amosite on the floor, you could feel it with your hand. It was just a complete and utter mess. He filed a complaint, sued me for $45 million for trying to stop his work. DOL sent an inspector down, and I was inside containment with him. We're both up in the tie neck of the suit and all, and he's looking around, And I was trying to explain to him that ceiling tiles are friable. And he said, well, the rules don't say that. And I remember using some choice curse words, breaking the ceiling tile on my knee, and saying, look at this, whatever, you get the point, that it's friable. We got out of containment, and I heard him call Albany and said, you know, it's not what we were told. So now ceiling tiles are certainly suspect material. What should we do with them on a routine job of changing old ceiling tiles? And it's not just the red back. There's a lot of ceiling tiles that have asbestos in them. They're getting old. You take them out, they're friable as hell. We would never disturb spray on or surfacing material. Ceiling tiles, I think, are really suspect. And I think the group of us, we have to make the effort to make sure ceiling tiles are examined before somebody attacks them. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, and yes, the comments are very valid, and we go back, way back. So anyhow, these are just some pictures of what the maintenance workers did in terms of debris. And you can see it on top of the file cabinet, you can see it on top of the legal cabinet, and surfaces throughout. Building owner staff attempted a cleanup. When we got there, they had this fan that they had gotten somewhere, and they were just, which is typically used for mold jobs, not asbestos jobs. And Kevin, I don't think they would ever pull enough CFM in this 5,000 square foot space to really clean the air. But they had that there with that note that they then put, do not turn on, because this was after they realized the ceiling tiles were asbestos. Then it was like, whoops, what do we do? So here is the outside stairs. You can see in the circle the debris. You can see in the dumpster, and you can see on the floor outside the dumpster, and red backed, which, like I said before.
Precedent in Rhode Island.
What?
Precedent Snyder Vance.
Yeah, you can see them right there. So you can see them circled, highlighted. Made the news, not.
In the bags, you know.
And what was in the back, we had no idea. But you know, the workers didn't know what they were doing. As far as they were concerned, they were told to remove the ceiling tiles and replace the ceiling tiles. The last ceiling tiles that they did leave behind them were the ones that were intricately involved with HVAC equipment. So where the ceiling tiles had been cut out to accommodate ductwork or fans or lighting and things like that. So they kind of picked and chose what they removed and left the others for the next weekend. Thank you, by the way. So this was a variance, and this was the consultant who came in for the owner. And they presented a case to DOL saying, listen, we've picked 6 places, and these are what should be done. So DOL, getting a qualified consultant's request for a variance, issued the variance, and that was what was done. Now, fortunately, the workers, they went above and beyond. And why? Because I knew the company. I'm going to give a shout out to anybody that's downstate, knows New York Insulation. Jeff Michelle, I've known him for years. And Jeff and I had done a complicated job just previously. And I told Jeff what was going on. He'd never seen the job. He said, Mark, listen, I don't care. I'm on TNL. I'll do whatever you want. And so, you know, we wanted the workers, the lawyers, and the children, and the families that came into the space to be safe. We wanted to make sure they were safe. So they cleaned everything. Case number 2 is gross contamination throughout. The rugs, file cabinets, and desks, and over 5,000, as I said. And they cleaned it. They did a great job. And I was able to look my client in the face and tell them that their space was free. They're still concerned because half of the space intermittently still has asbestos ceiling tiles because they don't know what to do with the ceiling tiles at this point. So they get new ceiling tiles and old ceiling tiles. And anytime the ceiling tile is disturbed, like about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago, we got a call. We needed to go and do wipes, do air sample, and test the ceiling tile because the workers, the attorneys who are representing families and everything, you know, they're doing it out of the goodness of their heart. They're not doing it for legal salaries. You know, the average salary of an attorney working in a non-profit is about $40,000 a year. So they're there for people. DOL issued the variance, for the minor areas that the consultant had proposed, the dumpster, and they didn't show the stairs or the interior. So, you know, again, DOL did what they were right, and I understand that, and I understand how difficult it is to get involved or get in the middle of 2 competing consultants. So, Lord won. At the end of the day, he did win, but you know what? So did our client, whose workers and space was protected.
Go back.
Okay.
Go back.
Go back. Go back.
Let me just say this. Go back.
Let me just take it. Got it, get the next one anyway, so thank you.
This why. Mark and I went round and round on trying to figure out why. Because from our vantage point, if we had come in as inspectors and found the ceiling tiles, even at the stage that we found about half of them, maybe a quarter removed, we would have said, this is an asbestos space. We would have said you have to do it the right way, at a minimum with tests, at a minimum. Yes, as Mark pointed out, it was not only lawyers, and they're tough to deal with to begin with. No shots against lawyers, but it's their world. But they brought in little kids and parents of people who needed legal help. It was a non-profit. So here you got this place that a consultant came in and selectively tested 6 areas where Mark had found asbestos in the dust. From the bulbs of the dust and in the wipes of the dust. He did qualitative analysis. And we had a source, the overhead. It was a friable asbestos material. So DOL, we have one explanation that maybe they didn't want to get embroiled in a conflict between consultants. You know, the 2 consultants go at each other, Angela came up with it. Maybe. But we cannot figure out why they didn't declare this a full containment and a full abatement. The rug was filthy. I used a technique that I'll talk about in a few moments on the rug. I put this marker agent on the rug and I said, okay, clean it up. Then they came back in and tested it, and boy, the marker agent was still there. But they had vacuumed. They were good guys, back and forth. You can't clean some of this stuff. It's just too small. The vacuum cleaners can't pick it up. So I asked him, what should have been done? Should we have gone to DOL and screamed and yelled? We couldn't. The people from DOL were nice. They talked with us, and this variance came down. You know, I've heard stories over the decades being in the industry that the variance people, they write their variance, but then on one job, I remember an inspector, for those in southern New York, the infamous John Douglas, came down, we showed him the variance. We don't need no stinking variance. And he ripped it up on the spot, and he says, you'll do what I tell you to do. It just doesn't matter. And when we followed up, it turned out, yep, the inspector has incredible power. The inspector came in his job. She'll talk to nice Stacy, really decent. She sends it up to the people up in Albany. What should we have done? Anyone? What should we have done? It was wrong, just completely wrong. That's all I can say. And it bothered both of us no end. Thank goodness, Jeff Michelli and New York Insulation. Yes, they were on T&M. It was a gift for them. And they really did a good job cleaning everything. We didn't test the everything items. We just said, clean it all. So we got out of there, and as Mark said, he could look these lawyers in the face and say, look, it's been cleaned as well as we can clean it under the rules that we're operating at. And that's the way it was. So I would only caution you, if you have any space, we've talked about a lot of sophisticated stuff here. Think about the ceiling tiles. They could be. And I've always remembered that stupid exhaust fan sitting inside there. They had it in several rooms. You would have had an absolute fit, Kevin. They were using this to dry it out, to clean it up, and all it was doing was blowing everything around. So that's a tale of woe and one of our problems in life, and we live with that. So, case number 3. Anyone recognize the decal on the helmet? I really thought Kevin would pick up on this one and come back at me. What does it say?
Johns Manville.
Johns Manville. I spent a lot of time up at the mines in my history as a geology professor. So I just put that on sort of tongue-in-cheek, hoping he'd criticize me, but he didn't catch it. Or maybe he liked it and wanted to embarrass me. I don't know. Anyhow, case 3. A 9-story storage building. Top 2 floors, about 12,000 feet each. 12,000 feet, that a building designed as fireproof, so it was high-end on storage. And the top 2 floors were used by different tenants. The 2nd floor, the 8th floor underneath, was used by many building restaurants in New York City to file all of their tax records down to menus. So, you know, you can go back, they can find one of your charge receipts from 20 years ago, all of the building records. Then the ninth floor was used by an antique artifact collector agency that did high-end French antiques. So why did this become a problem? Mark said to me in March of 2024, Dad, that's 2 years ago, you know, things are kind of quiet for you now that you're sort of retired, sort of. Why don't you handle this job? The background on it that made it a problem was that it was an illegal asbestos removal. Now, not only was it an illegal asbestos removal to begin with, they got the mag block TSI variously 28 lineal feet up to several hundred lineal feet, depending upon which record we were able to decipher. That was illegally removed on a day without any containment, and lo and behold, because there was such expensive stuff, millions of dollars of antiques on this floor, they had cameras, security cameras going. So smart, you're on videotape. And I've seen stills on the pictures. They would not give me the actual videotape. They're saving that for the inevitable lawsuit that's going to be filed on all of this and go through. But the pictures were bad enough. So these people are carrying out blocks of mag block, which is usually alpha-light or chrysotile sometimes, in a magnesium hydroxide, magnesium carbonate base. And it's the real powdery stuff, you know, stuff that you're supposed to wet, you throw it into the bag, and all it does is just sit there with the water, and the surfactant doesn't penetrate. It's a real sticky material. But there are clouds of this stuff going on. You notice the picture to the right, a mark up there sampling. This is where the mag block used to be and was missing. This is a heater fan. There were 4 of them anyhow on the floor that were blowing while this thing was going on. So you just got to picture it. We see the snow outside. This is sort of what it was like. It had to be by reconstruction. Some of the surfaces that we looked at had asbestos and other debris. And then this one was on the floor below, the 8th floor, where when they took out the mag block from several of the risers, there was air cell underneath it that fell down into the floor below. That gave rise to DEP in the city wanting the entire 8th floor, thousands of boxes of records, individually cleaned or disposed of. I was able to prevail. I actually had a win with DEP, saying, look, this corresponds to maybe 6 minor asbestos jobs. And a minor, you can just clean it up with a tent and do all that had to be done. So I'm not going to talk so much about that because we got out of that in about 2 or 3 weeks with only 6 tents and TEM clearance all the way. With the 9th floor, we got into a back and forth with DEP, the lawyers, the tenant, the owners. And we had a project designer come on board because we had to design a scope of work that was approved by a project designer. We couldn't just get a contractor in. We had to have a written scope of work that went through at least a half a dozen major reviews, back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And even with the back and forth, we found things, as one of the speakers said, on Wednesday, you always find things once you start working. So we had to do some changes, but fortunately, we were able to work with the contractor, and as a consultant, we carried great weight to get it done, because ultimately we were doing TEM clearance by air and TEM clearance on surfaces to get everything clean. And everything was not only the boxes, the shelves, we even had decorative flowers. Picture that image of Nancy Guthrie, that terrible thing with the guy who was coming up trying to put foliage on the camera. We had fake foliage that the restaurants were using for decorative stuff that had been contaminated. We had to clean individual leaves. It was a crazy mess, but we got out of that pretty well. The DEP and the owner accepted the scope of work. The scope of work by the tenant standards was the ASTM World Trade Center disaster in the Libby, Montana, the 5,000 structures and residual dust. I went round and round with their consultant, who was a friend, turned out he was Mark's first boss back in 87, 88 from the MSL now. And good guy, Jim Ryan. He was representing the tenant. So he was in Paris at the time. We're going back and forth on calls, refining down to the detail, the exact testing. And once we locked in on that testing, the property owner had to provide a written attestation, that was their word, a certification that each item was safe for unrestricted use, that was the actual language of the attestation, for commercial sale and use. Privately, they're worried, my interpretation was, they were worried they would sell one of these high-end, like a little hassock for $50,000. Somebody would put their feet up on it and asbestos clouds would go up in the air. Yeah, she'd laugh and joke and say, this is stupid. But society has fear of asbestos. So you're not going to buy something, spend that kind of money. And some of these things were like a couple $100,000, $300,000, $400,000. If there's any possibility of contamination, so they would come back and sue. And literally we had a very high standard to reach so that the tenant would be happy with what the owner said they had done. The contaminated work area. I had many, many slides and really tried to cut them down to give you a sense of what was going on. You look at the place, the horse was kind of funny. We had to clean the horse and do something with that. We had all kinds of chemicals and electrical stuff. I just declared that as contaminated hazmat material, brought in the 55-gallon drums, and we threw it all out. We had a whole bunch of tools and stuff like that, and books, and one of the loopholes that I was able to use, and I did it properly. We cleaned what we could, and it was either dispose of it or give it to the tenant and say, this is it, you won't get an attestation. So boxes of screws, nuts, bolts, tools, and all of that, they just took fine. The items themselves were scattered throughout the place, often very, very jammed, like the sofas here. And we had to divide the stuff into porous and non-porous. And I would test the non-porous typically with wipes, and the porous with vacuum. And I would test the porous, like the cushions, by going on surfaces, and a replicate sample in the creases of the couch forever, and generate a sample result. One win that I was really kind of self-happy about is that I was able to win with DEP on all of these boxes. Hundreds, I never counted them all, but there's 12,000 square feet, and almost all the shelves were filled with business records like this. And the tenants on this floor, multiple tenants, high-end restaurants in New York City, their point was, I need the records. DEP wanted them all thrown out. And I said, they need them for taxes, for business, these are important records. That's why it's in a fireproof, resistant building. So they were able to accept that if we cleaned the boxes, we would be okay. Originally, they wanted every box open and every page and every folder vacuumed and cleaned. They had the belief, whatever it was, this is how they saw the world, that the asbestos fibers talk about, as you pointed out, going through meandering, that the asbestos fiber could be attracted into the holes in the boxes and go on it. Fortunately, I was able to save that. Then a big fight that we had was over the boxes, the containers. They were shipping stuff in from all over the world, and they wanted us to open each box and clean each item. There were several hundred more items than the original approximately $3,800 on their insurance bill of lading on the inventory. And I said, there's no way. We will test, we will clean the box, the outside, and we'll test the outside of the box, and then they're yours. Or we'll just dispose of it and you can get into litigation. They accepted that until the very end. And I think I'm going to be finished with all of the attestations next month, my last 300 attestations to prepare. They suddenly found about 1,000 more items. And we fought this one. I said, look, when we left there in January, February, and March, there was nothing left. You gave us everything that you said was there. And suddenly you come up with another 1,000. And we decided that in our view, it was just stuff in the boxes. and we refused to clean them. We convinced the owner that this was a valid route, and we ended up winning, so we didn't have to open the boxes, which there was no way that fibers could go into a sealed box and contaminate the items inside. Now, the asbestos contractor has a job to gross clean and to fine clean each item by wet, damp, wiping, and HEPA vacuuming. The question that popped up, and it's bothered me for decades, I can say decades on that, in my first asbestos abatement in 78, 79 under the school asbestos job. How would the project manager, the monitor, know the cleaning of any settled dust was done well enough to meet the 5,000 structures per square centimeter standard? How would you know? Or do you just do it and say, okay, send it in, if it fails, we'll do it again, that's another couple of $100, and you just keep going. And you almost, if you weren't honorable, say, hey, fail, I'm just gonna make another couple of $100 on every sample, and the cash register will just keep going. So we all have our views of the world. The consultant thinks he looks like this. I wanted to put a halo on the cartoon, because being a consultant, we're the good guys. And then I was going to block out our view of the contractor, because he's the bad guy. Always, you know, he's all protected. He's got his little COVID mask on and a blanket for PPE and all of that. The consultant says, I don't think you cleaned it well enough. As long as I've been in the industry, God, I hate to talk this way, but it's always, did you clean it right? Oh yeah, we cleaned it right. You know, we did it. How do you ever know? Unless you put a technician in, a hygienist, to walk beside the hammer and watch everything. And the system doesn't work that way. So yeah, you cleaned it. How do we ever know? And back in the 90s, I got this idea. I was doing geology work in the zinc mine in New Jersey, where there were fluorescent minerals. And it occurred to me, the light bulb went off. Let's grind up some of that and use it as a marker. Well, I did. It was very successful. But you couldn't get fluorescent dust very easily, and the mine ended up closing. The world has changed. The dust is now more available. And when the consultant says, I don't think you cleaned it well enough, and he gets answered by, what do you expect? Perfection? And this is the kind of thing, you know, I did it. How do you know I didn't do it? Well, saying it is one thing, but proving it is something entirely different. How do you prove it in a way that's not personal, that's not nasty, that I'm out to screw you, or I'm going to show you that I'm smarter than you and I can get away with it? It's sort of value neutral. The answer is that you can now buy fluorescent dust on the market at Amazon. For $16.49, you can get your choice of 6 little packages of, it's not cocaine, it's like fluorescent powder. And here is one that's fluorescent green, and the way it looks in natural light. And it used to be that the ultraviolet light was a lamp that was $6,000, $7,000. They were expensive and really tough to use, and you had to maintain it. Now you can get 5 simple battery operated for less than $15. It's just really reasonable to use this. So how do you do it? We would have the technician, and you'll know the hygienist here is in literally full gear. The contractor did get 1 citation because one of the workers had his hood off his head, and he got written up on a fine by DEP. That's how crazy this whole thing was. So we had to do it by the book to the letter of the law. He would first use this fluorescent tracking powder and put it on the object. This happened to be a bench. And here it is with the light. We would then have the technicians, the handlers rather, clean. So here, the handlers are cleaning, doing a gross cleaning inside the work area. Then we have to construct a separate clean room. And in the clean room, they would do another fine cleaning using HEPA, and in this case, fine amended water. And they would clean these things until they passed the fluorescent light test. So the hygienist would take these things as they came out of the clean room and shine the light on it. No glow, it works. Glow, do it again. And we showed the workers how this worked, and that was a really important thing, because it was fair. They saw that we had a means of determining whether they really cleaned. Otherwise, how would we know? You can't have the hygienist sit inside the clean room and have another hygienist outside the clean room worrying about the pumps. We actually got one violation because the workers had moved the air pumps to set up more quality on another clean room, and that's just when the DEP inspector came and said, oh, the pumps aren't organized the right way. We showed them in the logbook, this is where they're supposed to be. When the hygienist came out of the work area, the pumps had been moved back, and we didn't know until we got the violation months later. Okay. The fluorescent dust marker agent allowed for certainty. There are a few things in science and in industry too, where we can say absolutely, I'm positively sure that you did this the right way and it was done. By assuring that the item was really clean, properly clean, because you clean it by wiping, amended water, vacuuming, you know that it's going to likely meet the requirement of less than 5,000 structures for no liability. And in fact, about 4,000 analyses from the 9th floor, not a single asbestos fiber was detected. And we took this as a really good sign. We felt really good. I tried turning it around midway, 3/4 of the way, saying, okay, we're getting zeros. Why do we have to keep doing this? No, they have to keep doing it. Okay, you know, it's just going to cost you more and more, but we had no way around it because the lawyers had signed off on this. So a word of caution, when you start a job, it's not just the specifications from the project designer. If there's a lawyer involved, read those documents too. So, conclusions on this. Thinking about this a lot, bulk and air samples are going to remain the primary criteria for determining acceptability or clearance of a work area. They're simple, they're widespread, everybody knows how to use them, and they're legal in New York State. As Angelo pointed out, a lot of these things, we had to switch over early on the TEM to conform with ELAC. We found out, I checked with Steve and what Millett and Hayes had published, and lo and behold, the ASTM method was like that for New York State. So we were clean on the method. Settled dust can be a useful supplement. It can be one tool in a toolbox, but you have to be really careful with it because nobody knows what it means. And as Mark eloquently pointed out, and I went around with Jim years ago, when you put it into this sonic disaggregator, you start to separate fiber clumps to fibrils down to, you never get to an individual crystal of chrysotin or amazon or whatever, but you're separating these tiny little suckers and you can get millions of fibers in a couple of inches of surface from just one single clump of chrysotil. It's tough, and you've got to be careful how you present this. If you say to a client, hey, you got a million structures out on this surface, this is not good. So, DeLuca said, you guys look like three amigos. Where's Peter? Is he here? There he is. And I did this for you. So, yes, the three amigos. We hope you've learned something. We hope you've given some insights into this. It's sticky at best, but it's useful as one tool in all of this. So, any questions?
Yeah, why am I the short guy? Why am I the short guy?
Yeah, great. It's like, whatever. Just one as an aside, if there's no question, we can do just a couple of minutes on this. Mark's going to talk about this. Mark? He just did this about a week ago. It's on Park Avenue. Talk about a renovation done wrong.
I'm back. Okay.
There he is.
Yeah, this was a client of mine, and they had a contractor come in and do demolition, a good client of mine. And I guess DEP came in based upon a complaint from the 16th floor where they're also doing renovation. So DEP came in though, and because they found what they say is a little bit of asbestos, and by the way, when I called up the DEP and I said, can I get your results? Can you share them with me? And they said, no, you have to get it through FOIL. I said, well, what if my client chooses not to engage in the immediate remediation and cleanup from all that debris throughout the whole apartment, about 7,000 square feet. They said, you'll get an order from the commissioner ordering you to do an immediate cleanup, or we will start heavily fining and it will get worse than you can imagine. So they were being told that they had to clean, even though they didn't have the results. There is black mastic, wall waterproofing. I thought that might have been the issue, because they did aggressively impact the mastic. The mastic was negative. There was a very little bit of pipe insulation. Not enough, in my opinion, to ever have warranted the entire apartment being cleaned up. But DEP, they're very aggressive, not only in that regard, but they also ordered and mandated that we do TDM testing through the entire project. So not just backgrounds to see if there's any contamination. They want TDM air samples through the entire project, which is going to be about a month. And then we start, once we get everything cleaned up, then we can open up the enclosures, the columns, the chases, and then abate the remaining asbestos that we know about that had not been impacted yet. Go ahead. You notice the picture?
And Mark, really, it's a little bit of ACM in there. There was some, I guess, a piece of.
In the green.
In the
There was a
green.
little bit there, but that was all we found. That's it. And then
Yeah.
picture more.
There's one other thing Mark wants to talk about. We think DOL is moving in the right direction. You want to talk about these two things?
Well, I said it before, with DOL's new improved guidelines and recommendations, I've had contractors who are going to demo a house, and first of all, the departments, the local municipalities, in many cases didn't even know that they have to have an inspection report submitted to them. Now, in one case, the contractor called me and said, Mark, you only need to check the outside of the house and the pipes. Wink, wink. When I got there, all the siding was gone, and all the pipes had been abated. So that was the only thing they wanted me to check. I said, you're not interested in me checking the walls, the sheetrock, the plaster, any of the things? He said, no. Very specifically, the building department told me I only had to check the outside of the house and the pipes. In another case we had where the plaster was loaded with asbestos. But by the time I found out and got DOL involved, they had hired another consultant out of Westchester. He had sampled sheetrock, said, there's no asbestos here. They demoed the house in a very exclusive residential area. It's a difficult thing because different groups, different municipalities, different governing agencies don't all know what their obligations are. And I think as being consultants, we try to inform them and try to persuade them, but many times they just don't want to be bothered. They just want to get things done. I've had clients tell me, listen, the building inspector knows there's asbestos here. They just want to get this property. This property's been let go for years. They just want to get it down. We don't care, just get it down. And that's probably the biggest struggle, hurdle that we all face, because we know workers are getting exposed. We know that people are not doing things right because it costs them money. And as I've talked with many of my friends in this room and throughout the industry, in the professional meetings, it's a hard thing to do, because when you start having to face paying lots of money to do abatement, especially with the argument of friable, non-friable, New York State's great, all non-friable in open containers and so forth. New York City, everything has to be bagged. Roofing has to be bagged and carried down, and it has to be wetted, and they open the bags. So what the contractor does, he takes the roofing, puts it in the bag, sticks the hose in, gets it wet, and then it's wet enough, hopefully. So it's a big difference between New York City and New York State. Thank you all.